All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Cowboys are obviously full speed ahead as they prepare for the Week 6 matchup. We've got some interesting updates on that as the Cowboys get closer and closer to their Sunday game. But as we always like to on this channel, get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And I want to pull up this graphic here that I saw on social media that kind of breaks down how offensive series end. And what the creator of this graphic did is they ranked it, at least this allocation here, in terms of what percentage of drives end in either a touchdown or a first down, and they ranked the teams based on that criteria. So the Colts are number one with a 12% plus 69%. Touchdown to first down. The Bills are number two. The Cowboys are number three. The Chiefs are number four. The Lions are number five, and so on. So the Dallas Cowboys right now, 78% of their drives end a touchdown or at least get a first down. 11% in a score. 67% get at least a first down. 7% of their drives end in a field goal. 11% end in a punt, and 4% end in a turnover. So, I mean, there's a lot of good data here, right? But if you'll notice, one thing I think that's really interesting is the Cowboys are far from like the best offense in football in terms of this metric, right? They're 11% of their drives end in touchdowns. That's behind Buffalo, Indianapolis, and Detroit, right? 67% of their drives that end in a first down. That's behind Indianapolis, Buffalo, and right at the same level as Kansas City. How about field goal, right? 11% of the Colts drives end in a field goal. 10% of the Chiefs drives, 7% of the Cowboys drive end in a field goal. But the field goal metric's kind of weird, right? Because there are some drives, for example, end of the game scenario, right, against the New York Giants to force overtime. That was an 8+ drive, while there's been other drives that just get bogged down in the red zone that ended a field goal. So that one's kind of hard to determine, is that a good thing or a bad thing if it ended in a field goal or not. And then you look at the punt metric there, 11% end in a punt. That's higher than both the Colts, the Bills, and the Chiefs. Just ahead of the Detroit Lions, and 4% of their drives end in a turnover at the same level as the Colts and the Lions, but the Chiefs and the Bills are better. So basically what I'm getting at here is the Cowboys offense is doing really well, right? Obviously we can watch the games, we can look at the performances and say, yeah, they're doing a lot of good things. There's always room for improvement. And I think one of the things that we can get focused on a little too much is where things are going wrong, like defensively a lot of the time, and say, gosh, if they were only a little bit better there. But the important thing as you work through a season is you want all phases of the game to constantly be improving, especially the Cowboys offensively. Even though they're doing well, teams are going to start coming up with different strategies and plans to try and slow it down. So you've got to be mindful of that if you're Dallas and constantly be improving in that direction. Just like adjustments are needed defensively because they've been playing poorly, growth and adjustments are still needed offensively to stay ahead of the curve, right? They're not the 2007 Patriots here. So while the Cowboys offense and Dak Prescott, Javonte Williams, the O-line, Schottenheimer, Adams, they've been doing awesome. The important thing is that you've always got to continue to get better. The coaching staff has been focusing on that. The players have been focusing on that. The entire team's been focusing on that. But I want to throw this out there just for some context that as good as they've been, you can always be better and you should always be looking to improve. All right, let's get into the news here. So this first report is courtesy of John Machota over at The Athletic. Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer on his offensive play calling. I don't really call plays to try to get a ball to a spot on the field. I call plays to get balls to people. You're always going to feature your elite players. We have a lot of elite players. Dak is doing an incredible job of reading progressions, and the first open guy is going to get the ball, and I think that's what you're seeing. So this is the first time I've seen a coach describe it like this. I think it's absolutely genius. I love this. This is brilliant level stuff from Schottenheimer. It sounds so simple, and there's been people say things kind of like this where we gotta feed. Remember when Dez Bryant was Dallas? You got to get Dez involved early to keep him in the rhythm. To right, get him the football. But one of the things that Schottenheimer says here is he's not highlighting an individual player. John Gruden, when he wrote his book, or one of his books after he won the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he would talk about how he had his call sheet that would have, his 3rd and 5 calls, his red zone calls, whatever it may be, and he'd have a couple calls that were like just Keyshawn Johnson plays, or just things like that. Schottenheimer's taken that apparently to a whole nother level, where basically his entire call sheet, obviously they're going to have some system, and structure, right? Hey, listen, 3rd and 10 plus, they're going to have some goal line and things like that. But it seems a large portion of their call sheet and strategy is focused not on situations, not on, hey, what's a chunk play? Hey, what's here's a cover 2 beater, here's a man beater, whatever it is. That's normally how call sheets and strategies are orchestrated from the offensive side of the football. They're focused more on the player side. Now, you still have the scheme element, right? But it's interesting that he tries, again, that marriage of talent and scheme, of personnel and scheme. With Mike McCarthy, it was all personnel, right? It was very little scheme. It was very little, how can we get people open? Here with Schottenheimer, and this is what we've seen, it's, okay, how do we get Ferguson the football? How do we get Lamb the football? Pickens the football? Flournoy's doing well. We want to run the ball with Williams, right? Get Prescott on the edge, whatever it may be. Turpin when he's healthy. How do we get him the ball? What plays can we call, right? And things like that are really important, because if you look at, okay, how can we get Turpin the football, for example, or let's use Flournoy, because he obviously had a breakout game against the Jets. If you're like, okay, we want to get him the football. All right, well, let's look at his strengths. Okay, here are his strengths. Okay, here's what we expect the defense to do to him. Okay, here are the 5 plays we can game plan and then throw in the call sheet and then call over the course of the game. That's how you get guys that breakout performances, because they've had literally all week long, the focus has been getting Flournoy the football in situations that are beneficial to his talents while also challenge the defense and what their expected strategies to be, right? This is how the Cowboys offense has been so darn efficient, especially in the passing game, right? Prescott's played wonderfully, and obviously Schottenheimer highlighted it there, but this is genius level stuff, because it's next level thinking, and this is, again, quality coaching, and this is why Schottenheimer, Clayton Adams, the entire offensive staff has just gotten praise across the board, as they should be, because what they've been doing is they haven't gone just, okay, well, how do we beat a team strategy, or how do we get person X the football, or whatever. They've been basically marrying them both. We're like, okay, we want to get person X the football, but we want to figure out the best way to do that in the context of our game plan. And again, I know it sounds really simple, and you're like, why doesn't every team do that? Most teams don't, right? Most teams, they sit there and say, we're playing a cover 2 team, so guess what? We got a bunch of cover 2 beaters. Or we're playing a team that likes to blitz, we got to have a bunch of blitz beaters. And we'll have a few plays on our call sheet that, if we got a star receiver, hey, we just want to get him the football, right? There's that kind of thing that usually happens. Very rarely do you have an offensive staff, a play caller, who's focused primarily on getting the ball to his players in positions for them to be successful. That's how you have Flournoy have awesome games, right? That's how you have Pickens go from having 100+ yards against the Packers to only really having 2 catches against the Jets, right? Because they're looking for opportunities to give him the football, right? They did have that deep shot to him, but if it's not there in the context of the offense, then they'll sit there and say, okay, we'll go to Ferguson, we'll go to Flournoy, we'll get the ball in their hands, right? It's just smart thinking, it's smart strategy. I love this from Schottenheimer. It's one of these things that's sustainable, right? You can't win just on scheme alone, right? You can't win just sit there, we'll call beautiful plays and we'll trick the defense with a lot of eye candy and things like that. That'll be successful. That's good, but you got to also have the mindset of giving elite players the football in space, right? Or whatever opportunities are available to them. You certainly can't just win on talent alone. That was Mike McCarthy's strategy. We saw how that worked out. I know it's early, but the Schottenheimer-Clayton Adams combination, it does remind me a little bit of, those early Kyle Shanahan 49ers offenses where they had some talented guys, right? Of course, Deebo Samuel, Kittle, right? The running game, all of that, where they would scheme people open, get guys in space, or get one-on-one opportunities, and then their star players would make plays, right? It made the 49ers offense so tough to stop. Dallas, so far, 5 games, small sample size, are heading on that same trajectory. Credit to Schottenheimer, credit to Adams. I know everyone's giving rave reviews to these guys, but it's just every single day, every single data point just looks better and better. And look, it's never going to be perfect. There's going to be some ups, there's going to be some downs, but the trend, it's outstanding, right? It's undeniable at this point what these guys are doing, and it's really good stuff. All right, on that same vein here, this is courtesy of the Sleeper NFL X account, more of a fantasy account, but a fantasy sports account. But it highlights Jake Ferguson here. He says, among tight ends, Jake Ferguson ranks number 1 in targets, number 1 in receptions, 2nd in touchdowns, 4th in receiving yards. Ferguson is currently the tight end 1 in terms of fantasy on the season. Yeah, and it just goes back to what Schottenheimer was saying, right? In terms of, okay, we're going to get the ball to guys, get the football to our players in positions to be successful. Ferguson's not a guy who's, had a bunch of big plays in terms of what we saw sometimes in 2023. He hasn't had the highlight film. I know he had that screen touchdown, but there was very little people out in space. That was just a well-executed play. But remember in 2023 when, he would catch like a 10-yard pass and break a couple tackles and run over someone and turn into like a 30-yard gain, and he had a bunch of plays like that? Right, we're not seeing many of those from Ferguson this year, are we? Instead, we're seeing what we saw like against the Jets, where he's wide open and has a chance to rumble and cut through the defense and score twice, right? Once on that long screen, the second on a wide open play action. And that's the difference right there between McCarthy and Schottenheimer, right? That's the difference between what's the smart move Schottenheimer's making and then not a smart move McCarthy was making. McCarthy was like, Ferguson's a good player, right? We want to throw him the football, right? So you just, all right, run a little slant, run a little hitch, we'll throw you a football. Schottenheimer's like, Ferguson's a good player. Let's wait for the right opportunities to take advantage of that and call creative plays where we can get him in opportunities to be successful, where it makes life easier for our star players. That's the difference, right? And I'm not trying to hate on Mike McCarthy too much. He's obviously a good offensive coach in terms of his history in the National Football League and knows a lot more about football than I do, right? I'm not trying to like bury McCarthy, right? But the reality is, if you look at what Schottenheimer's doing with a guy like Ferguson versus what Mike McCarthy is doing or did with a guy like Ferguson, it's night and day, right? This is the intelligence. This is the great strategy of this new offensive coaching staff coming to fruition. All right, this next report here, getting to some injury news. Nick Harris at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, great follow on X, could not recommend more. He posted Tyler Smith with his knee and Tyler Guyton with his concussion were back at practice today after missing the Jets game. Smith, of course, was he was active for the Jets, but he was kind of an emergency guy that he did not play at all. The fact that he is back at practice in a limited fashion. But one caveat here, there's a lot of injury reports for the Wednesday practice. They'll say, oh, so-and-so is limited, some guy is limited. While it does matter, you'd like someone to be a full participant, a lot of people on Wednesday will be limited, especially as we get deeper into the season, especially if they're veterans, right? There's a little bit of load management, right? A guy played a full game Sunday or he's a little beat up. If he didn't play Sunday in Tyler Smith's case, there's no reason to just wear him out of physical practice. They're both in full pads, right? Guyton was limited as well, working his way through concussion protocol, but it seems both are trending in a good direction. And look, as impressive as it was for the Cowboys to win and win in dominating fashion against the New York Jets with a number of injuries they had, that's not sustainable, right? You can't win continuously, right, with all these injuries, right? Great effort to get a tie against the Packers and great effort to get a win against the Jets, but eventually the injuries, my running theme with injuries are like time. Eventually it's undefeated, right? Eventually if you have a lot of injuries, the wheels will fall off just because the depth just eventually collapses. Teams figure it out, right? This is just the reality of the National Football League. On a long enough timeline, talent eventually wins, right? You can have great coaching and great strategy, but eventually if you just have lower level talent because of injuries, it's just hard to have sustained success, excuse me. But we look at Tyler Smith back at practice. That's obviously a great sign. And Tyler Guyton working his way through concussion protocol. He's still limited, right? So he hasn't cleared protocol yet. And I think Schottenheimer was very clear to say this. He said, listen, we got guys back on the grass, to quote him, doesn't mean they're cleared to play, which I also think is a smart approach to take, right? Because you don't want to run afoul of the NFL, especially with Guyton concussion, right? He's back at practice. He may not be in contact drills yet, but if you sit there and say, oh yeah, we're excited to have Guyton back, the NFL is going to be like, dude, he hasn't cleared concussion protocol. Here's a $50,000 fine, and we're going to come down on you really, really hard. So I think they're trending in a good direction. Have to see how they practice during the week, but it would be huge to get both these guys back. Whether you like Nathan Thomas or Guyton to start or not, remember Nathan Thomas actually took some snaps from Terrence Steele at right tackle during the Packers game. So having these three tackles, Thomas, Guyton, and Steele, all healthy and available, that's key for Dallas. Again, they can survive with the only two of them. It'd be really nice to have all three, of course, and Tyler Smith, of course. He's an all-pro, right? So if you're looking at a guy to make your offensive line better, if he returns to the fold, that's a huge bump there. All right, let's get into this next report from John Machota again, talking more injuries. Cowboys wide receiver Cavante Turpin with his foot doesn't expect to play Sunday at Carolina. He worked on the resistance cords today, expects to be back the following week versus Washington. Which was kind of in line when the injury happened, right? It sort of felt like a 2-week injury that was based on the reporting, right? It seems to be following that line, which again, Turpin's injury, I think it stinks, obviously, but it creates opportunities for Jaden Blue. It creates opportunities for Flanoy and Tolbert. Mingo is back a full participant at practice. Kalen Carson, by the way, talk about cornerback depth, back at a full participant at practice. Doesn't mean they'll be active, doesn't mean they'll play, but this is a situation where they kind of weathered the storm a little bit. Mingo's back in the fold. Flanoy had a nice game, and he had some nice plays against the Packers, too, the week before. And, of course, you look at Tolbert. He has flashes every once in a while of blocking well and receiving well. One of the things you can say about Tolbert is he's a guy that every once in a while will just make a huge play out of nowhere, whether it's a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, or a huge catch against the Packers. And that's kind of a nice tribute to have, right? Because when you have a team that's got some weapons and a smart quarterback and a smart offensive coordinator, eventually you're going to have like an opportunity to make a play. And he took advantage of that. We saw it against the Packers. We've seen that in years past. So while the depth certainly, it'd be better to have Turpin than not, I think the wide receiver room and some of their playmakers in general have done a pretty good job holding down the fort, at least did against the Jets. And if Turpin can't play against Carolina, listen, get healthy against Washington. Love to have you back. Obviously great returner and sort of a weapon X kind of guy on offense. But they have enough pieces where they can maybe figure something out for the Cowboys in terms of moving the football and having a diversified passing attack, even without Turpin. So we saw that against the Jets anyway. Big challenge, of course, this week against the Panthers, as it is every week in the National Football League. But again, if Turpin can just miss 2 games with that foot injury, That's not the end of the world. All right, this next report is from Fox NFL highlighting the top MVP 2025 NFL MVP odds. And I bring this up to talk about a disconnect that's going on right now between the media and what the odds makers are saying for the favorites to win the Most Valuable Player award, the MVP award. So number one on this list is Josh Allen. Number two is Patrick Mahomes. Number three is Baker Mayfield. Two are tied at the four spot. That's Stafford and Jordan Love. And Jared Goff is number six, right? And Dak Prescott has gotten a lot of praise saying, oh, he's playing at an MVP level. He's playing like an MVP. And according to the odds makers, they say not so. And that's not saying Dak Prescott isn't playing extremely well, but I do think it's important to take a step back because, look, I know MVP is a storyline award more than anything else, right? Obviously, you have to play well, but there's got to be some great story to it, right? Yeah, you win 15 games or something like that, or you're a different kind of player. Like Lamar Jackson's first MVP, it was like, whoa, we have never seen this before, right? Or if Brady has a record-breaking year when he was playing, right? Oh, okay, you win the MVP, things like that. So there's a lot of storylines and criteria that go with it. And the reality is, because Dak Prescott is a starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, just like in 2023 when he should have won the MVP, he didn't. So I think it's important to understand there's a lot of people saying, oh, he's playing like an MVP. We'll have to see how Dallas finishes out the rest of the year, obviously, with wins, losses, and their record. That could shift things a couple ways, one way or the other, depending how things go. But for anyone out there who's actually realistically expecting the NFL to name Prescott MVP, if he continues to play like this, guys, it probably isn't going to happen. Right, just temper your expectations because he's Dak Prescott, right? Because there's a narrative right now in the media, and it's been going on for years, that Prescott is overrated, that he's not very good, right? There's, people talk about the memes and the jokes and things like that, and it's always been silly because Prescott's always been a very competent quarterback. He's had some elite seasons, he's had some dud seasons, but he's generally been above average, generally been very solid, very good. But the reality is, because of that narrative that he's not elite, right? You look at everyone on this list, there's always been a narrative. Even Baker Mayfield took some criticism, but he was he was number one overall pick, right? So if you look at the rest of these guys, they've all had narratives of elite, superstar, best of the best kind of guy, or they were number one overall pick. Prescott was a fourth rounder, right? So if you don't have a narrative behind you that propels you to an MVP, you're not going to get it. So we'll have to see how Prescott plays. He could continue playing at this level and get more accolades. We'll see what happens. But for anyone out there thinking, wow, Prescott, he's really got a chance if he can keep this up to win MVP, the odds makers, the smart money are saying, listen, because he is who he is, he ain't going to get it. I think it's important to throw that out there because just temper your expectations a little bit. I don't think it's right, by the way. I don't think this is how things should be. I just think it just is what it is. We saw in 2023, right? Prescott was better than Jackson in every conceivable metric. He won 12 games, won the division, but they gave it to Lamar Jackson. Why? Because of narratives. It's just the way the MVP's always been that way, unfortunately. All right, this next report, back to Nick Harris. No Donovan Wilson at practice today after leaving the Jets game late with an injury. If he cannot go against the Panthers, that would open the door for either Marquise Bell, number 14, or Elijah Clark, number 38, to get the start. This is obviously on the back of Wanye Thomas replacing Malik Hooker. So we're seeing safety depth is certainly challenged. Marquise Bell played some snaps down the stretch, obviously, when Wilson left the game. Obviously it's one of these weird injuries, kind of like the Sanborn injury, where a lot of people are like, okay, well, that's not the end of the world because Wilson wasn't exactly playing great to begin with. He's obviously a guy who's probably not going to be in Dallas next year unless he signs like a super team-friendly deal. Next year is going to be a void year technically on his contract. So not the end of the world here for the long-term trajectory of the franchise, but it just speaks to how injuries just can take over the National Football League sometimes. I mean, you look at the Baltimore Ravens. I talked about the Ravens, Lamar Jackson a second ago, but they're devastated by injuries. They're 1-4. Does anyone really believe the Ravens, if they're 100% healthy, are a 1-4 team? Of course not. But injuries happen, and they can just eviscerate your team, and it just becomes it becomes a facade, right? You can find a way to win games, you can find a way to hang around, or things collapse, like we saw with Dallas last season. And so much and so often in the National Football League. I mean, the Detroit Lions last year were a great example. Through 13, 14 games, they were the best offense in football with a top 10 defense, very opportunistic. And then Aiden Hutchinson got hurt, like against Dallas, for example, and then their secondary got hurt. Then they couldn't stop anybody, and then they get upset, right? And it's just one of those things. Injury luck, one way or the other, can just flip entire seasons. We've seen this with the Dallas Cowboys, of course. I mean, how many times in the playoffs in this recent last 2 decades of lack of playoff success did the Cowboys get fortunate, an injury matchup in their favor? Right, the Eagles played the 49ers in the NFC Championship game in 2022, and Brock Purdy broke his hand in the second quarter, and the 49ers ran out of quarterbacks. Right, it's just one of those things. Like when does that happen for Dallas? Right, you look at Washington last year playing a Lions team down to third string corners and third string safeties, and it just became a mincemeat for Jane Daniels, right? Sometimes injury luck plays a huge role. We don't like to talk about it because it's such a negative connotation. It makes people uncomfortable because it's like, you don't really want to think of how games are decided by health, but they really are, right? And that's why depth really matters too, right? That's why you can't have a top-heavy roster and expect to win consistently without at least an elite coach. Now, the good news is the Cowboys coaching staff, certainly offensively, looks pretty good. Seems to be able to survive potentially what we've seen in the last 2 weeks with the injuries. But eventually, you got to get healthy. And I think the fact that the Cowboys are beat up now, the safety position is concerning, right? Sanborn's out with concussion right now too, but both of those situations, Sanborn and Wilson right here, you get young guys, right? Now you're going to see Murray, Shamar James, and Leofau. Hey, good young linebacking core. Let's see what happens, right? There's going to be some bumps. Marquise Bell, if he fills in, likely going to be Bell. If he fills in for Wilson, there's going to be some bumps, right? It's going to be some challenges here for this defense to overcome. But here's the thing. When you're building for the future and you're building a team, you can handle this. You can go through some lumps. You can go through some of these issues because you're not in hyper win now mode. Teams like the Lions, teams like the Packers, for example, teams like the Ravens that are in hyper win now mode. The Bengals, they get put in a tough situation because they're like, great, we're built to win a championship this year or next year, and now we've got injuries. We've got to scramble. We got to do something. When you take a long-term approach like the Cowboys are doing right now, rebuilding, retooling their program, it allows them to weather the storm a little bit better because they can take a step back and not rush to judgment and make rash decisions. So I'm excited to see how if Donovan Wilson can't play, which I'm assuming if he didn't practice Wednesday, it seems like he's probably not going to. We'll have to wait and see, of course, as the news develops. But I'm excited to see what Bell and potentially Clark do in that situation. All right, let's final post here from Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. He said, Dak Prescott is again at an MVP level. And a great question was posed to Jerry Jones by 105.3 The Fan during his Cowboys segment. Is Dak mentally processing at the level of peak Tony Romo? You know, it's an interesting thought experiment, right? Because we're going back to 2014, and that was peak Romo by far, right? Obviously, 07, it was an explosive team, and he came onto the field in 06 and really revitalized the team, even though he had a struggle to the end of the season in 2006. Obviously, the fumbled snap in the playoff game, rings very loudly in a lot of people's memories. But when I look at Dak Prescott right now, it does give a lot of late-stage Tony Romo, 2013, 2012, 2014 Romo, which is obviously what happens as quarterbacks get older, they get more experience, the game slows down, especially when they have a little bit more, in the case of Prescott, better coaching, in the case of Romo in 2014, better play, better talent in terms of the offensive line. And I think we are seeing them at very similar levels. But they're so different players, it's so hard to compare. Romo's scrambling and unpredictability and creativeness was such a next level kind of attribute, sometimes for the bad, but a lot of times for the good. Prescott has some of that, but he's much more of a decision maker, right? He's much more, I'm not going to scramble around to buy time. I'm going to feel pressure. I'm going to step up and I'm going to get what I can, right? And I think that's one thing about Prescott's game that's the most important, right? A couple times against the Jets, right? They got some pressure immediately and he takes the football, steps up in the pocket and scrambles for 4 yards. Right? Not a huge play. Doesn't make it, it's not a highlight play. Like Romo may scramble around and turn into a 30-yard play. But by staying ahead of the chains, managing the game, that's Dak Prescott so far this season. And to me, that's the most important thing. He's done a good job distributing the football, but he's not averaging 1 million yards per passing attempt. I talked about it yesterday. His statistics, if you extrapolate them out the rest of the season, it's not like he's setting the world on fire for touchdowns. He's actually trending to have fewer touchdowns this season on a per-game basis than Romo did in 14 and then Romo did in 2007, right? So it's not like he's blowing up the world in terms of stats and just volume, but the way he's been efficient is sort of something we haven't seen at the Cowboys quarterback position, at least in the 21st century by far. So I definitely think we're seeing the best of Dak Prescott right now, but he's so different than Romo. It's really hard to compare. It's totally apples and oranges here, but I think he's playing well. And I think the fact that we're seeing comparisons, right, and people are like, hey, is Dak Prescott peak Tony Romo? And people are just openly discussing it. It again goes back to Schottenheimer and his offensive coaching staff and the smart moves they made. I truly believe to unleash a player, unleash a quarterback, you need to surround him with talent and you need to surround him with scheme. I think the scheme was never great with Garrett, but the talent was absolutely stacked, certainly in 2014. When you look at that O-line, tied in with Witten, Des Bryant, Cole Beasley, and it certainly was there in 2013 as well, but their defense was garbage. But when you look at this Cowboys team now, they've had so many injuries. I think they have talent when healthy. Not at the level of 2014, but they got a lot of talent when healthy, but they got so many injuries. To me, this year is a lot more scheme. It's a lot more strategy. And it goes back once again to the theme of the day. It's Schottenheimer, his offense, and the smart moves they've been making. All right, let's get into the comments, right? Get things started with our member comment today. Like I always talk about, I really appreciate our members. I will always get to the member comments, every single member comment, and get to them first. So that's my promise. to all of our members. This is from Robert Bass, 3667. He comments, Nick, as usual, but I don't take it for granted. Another superior report made by SMI. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dear people, if your conscience tells you, please support SMI and Nick, including financial support. I'll watch other good Cowboys sources for true reports, and I can attest with clear conscience that Nick and SMI are up there with the best. I am so proud to be a supporter of SMI and Nick. Go Cowboys, go SMI and Nick. Well, Robert, that's really nice. I really appreciate that. I mean, that's awesome. I talk about this all the time, but I appreciate all the commenters. I talk about it. I really love our members, of course, but I appreciate everyone that watches and comments. Like this, so much of the show to me, the best part is when we get to this segment and I go through the comment section and I can see what you guys are thinking and saying, because there's a lot of smart people and really supportive people. So I really appreciate it, Robert. You're an awesome salesman. So everyone listen to Robert. All right, let's move on to the next one from ProdB1CY882. He's got 2 points here. The first point, Dak will end with 40 touchdowns, 8 to 10 picks, yada, yada, yada. What many people don't get is the MVP doesn't go to the best or most impressive QB. It goes to the best QB between the top 2 to 3 teams in the league. He may have an incredible statistical season, but MVPs are won on a 13-4 team with an impressive, efficient season. Unlikely the Cowboys do that. MVP won't happen, even with Dak playing so incredible. I agree 100%. Just talked about it, right? It's such a narrative award where they're just not going to give it to you. And so many times it's starting quarterback that's playing good football on the best team, right? And it becomes such a fault because if you look at the guys that won MVP for so many years, like the Peyton Mannings and the Tom Bradys and things like that, people just realized, oh, Peyton Manning was winning a lot of games and had, was a good quarterback, putting up good numbers. Tom Brady winning a lot of games, good quarterback, putting up good numbers. That must mean what an MVP is. And they kind of took backwards logic, right? Instead of saying, all right, Brady and Peyton Manning were the most valuable players, and because they were so good, that's why they were winning and putting up good numbers, right? People took it the other way. They say, okay, the best players just must be the ones that are on good teams and putting up good numbers. And that's not necessarily the case, right? You got to look at the quality of the player and quality of performance first, right? And I think that's just the reality of the MVP award, especially when you talk narratives and everything that goes into it. And I agree with you. There's no way Dak's not going to get it. It just ain't going to happen, right? The odds makers, the smart money, they see the same thing you're saying here. All right, the next point he made, the Eagles' move for Tank Bigsby is worth much more than it seems. Even if he doesn't play a snap, the point was to have a piece so the entire offense doesn't crumble if Saquon gets hurt. That's worth a 5th and 6th round pick for a championship team. Unlike a 4th or whatever we gave up for Trey Lance. No hate for Trey, but I just think Tank is a good addition for a championship team like that, regardless of if he's not on the field. It was a depth move on one of the deepest rosters in the league. I think that makes it very underappreciated. Howie, like all GMs, has blundered. The reason Howie has won what he has is because he makes up for his bad moves, like trading for A.J. Brown after Jalen Reagor was a bust. Your point overall about the trade was accurate, but I think it's a much better move than it may seem on the outside. Yeah, I just highlighted this yesterday, and I guess my larger point is, they traded a 5th and a 6th for a guy who hasn't played, hasn't gotten a carry. And I understand it's a depth move, and you're a championship team, you got to have depth available, and I get that. But I think my point is they traded for him at a time when they didn't need to, right? They didn't have the injuries yet. Barkley wasn't hurt. And you could sit there and say, well, the price may have gone up. Well, if you're a championship team that year, the difference between a 5th and a 6th and a 3rd, if you're trying to win a championship, isn't really that much, right? You talk to any GM and say, listen, would you surrender a 3rd round pick to create a better odds of you winning a championship this year significantly? And they'd say, absolutely we would, 100 times out of 100. And so I think the timing of it, right? They didn't have Barkley issues. They didn't have injury issues. They traded in the 5th and a 6th, and now he's sitting on the bench, right? And I think it just goes back to, obviously, the Cowboys have made bad moves. You talk about the Trey Lance trade. I didn't hate that trade, by the way. I think it's a good opportunity. The same reason I don't hate the Joe Milton trade is because any time you don't have a succession plan at quarterback of some type, you got problems, right? Dak Prescott's playing great, but he's north of 30, right? He's had at this point, 2 seasons where he's had severe injuries in his career, or in the season, right? It's getting up there to the point now where I don't want to say he's an injury concern, but he also had the injuries in 2021, missed a game, 2022. So he's a guy that's had some injuries. Every quarterback does, but it is a concern. You need to have a succession plan at least in place. And having a developmental guy like Lance and then Milton, I think makes sense. It didn't work out, but I think that's actually not a bad strategy to take. And I think right now, Howie Roseman gets a lot of credit for being just this genius GM. But he makes some of these moves. And again, the Bigsby deal could look like a genius move and could make me look like an idiot. Certainly very possible. In fact, there's a good chance that happens if like Barkley, God forbid, gets hurt or something like that. But I do think there's a lot of criticism, and this is sort of my other point on what the Cowboys do trade-wise or what other teams do trade-wise. And it's, oh, why can't we be like Team X where they just crush it all the time? The reality is there's a lot of teams in the NFL that make deals and they don't work out. Like you said, right? Jalen Reagor was a bust for Philadelphia, a laughable bust, right? There's that famous video of the Minnesota Vikings laughing at Howie Roseman when he picked Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson, right? Wow. Can you imagine how good Philly would be, by the way, if they had Justin Jefferson, if they didn't have A.J. Brown and they had Justin Jefferson? Holy smokes, right? So again, that's the kind of thing, and not to pick on Roseman, he's obviously an outstanding GM, one of the best in football, but I think a lot of people will be very critical of McClay or the Jones family or some decisions they've made over the past few years, deservedly so in a lot of cases, but no one bats 1,000, no one comes close. So that's just kind of the context I want to bring here, just as Cowboys fans, because you get such in a silo, right? You just look at your team and say, gosh, this was a bad trade or this was a bad pick. Everybody's got him, right? To your point, even Howie Roseman, one of the best GMs in football, he's had a lot of duds as well. All right, next comment here. This is from Kenneth Laberke. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ken, if I'm not, please correct me. He says, great content. I listen every morning at work. I like that you don't hype it up and just have insightful information and opinions. Thank you for the feedback, Ken. I greatly appreciate it. Tay Wilson commented, always start my morning with your content and love your non-biased opinions. I wish we moved past MP, talk about Micah Parsons. He will be all pro, move on. Now we play team defense, run game, and pass rush, just slowly getting there with younger, bigger players. Always wanted MP to play outside linebacker, longer career in my honest opinion. Thanks for our team concept. Love our coach. I wasn't sold at first, but I'm supporting him 100 now. Go Cowboys. Yeah, I do think the issue with Parsons and his size, I do think that's sort of one of the underlying reasons and concerns that the Cowboys had, right? And not necessarily for stopping the run, even though he wasn't the best run stopper in the world. He wasn't terrible, but he just wasn't the best. It wasn't like a Garrett, for example, for the Cleveland Browns. But I do think his undersized nature could leave him susceptible to injuries and wearing down over time. Doesn't mean he will be, and no one hopes he is, but that isn't always a concern, especially since he was an off-ball linebacker that basically became a full-time defensive end. You know, he has already had some back issues, evidently. He got hurt last season. You know, it's one of those things. I think he's playing great. I think he'll have a great career. He'll be all-pro, like you said, but there's a longevity concern there, and it's a real concern. If you're going to give someone, like the Packers did, $46.5 million a year for the next 4 or 5 years, you want him to be available those next 4 or 5 years. So I do think his size is a concern, and I think that was a big underlying factor in the trade for the Cowboys. We talk about Schottenheimer supporting him. Yeah, again, it's one of those things. If you listen to the media and listen to the talking heads, everyone said it was a stupid hire. Everyone hated it. It was like, oh, it's dumb, it's dumb, it's dumb, it's dumb. Dumbest hire in the world, right? You got to be careful in those situations. And I fell into it a little bit too. But when you watch them fill out the staff and you're like, that's a pretty good staff. And you listen to the players, and when he was hired, players seem to like him. Everyone seems to like him and respect him. The staff he filled out was great. And now we've seen through 5 games just the shift, right, in terms of the energy, the vibes, the momentum, and the scheme, most importantly, the culture. Every element is trending in the right direction, right? So you got to give Schottenheimer a lot of credit. I think a lot of people, especially if you listen to the ESPNs of the world and the Fox Sportses of the world, they were like, dumbest hire in the world. And now it looks like, maybe not. So so far so good with Schottenheimer. Obviously, these things can change and change quickly, but boy, they've been making smart moves. Credit to Schotty and everything he's done since he's taken over the home here in Dallas. This next comment is from Short, White, and Slow. That is a handle where 2 out of 3 apply to me. I'll let you guess what 2 of the 3 are. One's pretty obvious. Really been loving your channel the past few weeks, and as a guy who feels like he follows a lot of good NFL stats, analytics accounts, you seem to keep finding solid visuals that I haven't seen, LOL. Question, could you start including a link to some of the visuals you use or websites you use? Also, do you have a Twitter? So I've got our flagship NFL channel has a Twitter, but we basically just kind of post content and some high-level commentary on that. If you guys want me to create a Cowboys-specific SMI Cowboys Show Twitter where it's just me and I can kind of repost and share some of the graphics and where I get some of the information, I'm happy to do that. There's been talk about, providing commentary, whether it's in-game or whatever. Let me know. So put it in the comment section below. If enough people say yes, I'll create one. If you guys want me to create a Twitter X account, whatever they call it these days, to kind of show these information that I pull into the channel and also have some commentary there, let me know. Put it in the comment section below that you want me to do it. I'm happy to do it. I just don't know if anyone cares, right? That's the real thing. I think we live in a real world sometimes where there's a lot of certain personalities where they live on social media, and I kind of wonder how many people actually care about someone's opinions. Like I'll see someone talk, and I'm like, dude, I don't care about your opinion, right? Or someone else will comment like, I don't care about your opinion. I love reporters, good reporters, right? Because they're boots on the ground, and I love a lot of these analytics and these charts and this analysis because I'm like, man, this is good stuff, right? But in terms of the thoughts and opinions, I'm usually not so sure. But anyway, if you want me to create a Twitter or X account, let me know in the comment section below. I'm happy to do so. All right, this next comment is from BMR Collects, regular commenter. Good to see you again. I hope they offer running back Javonte Williams, an extension ASAP. I don't really like running backs, signing running backs for more than 2 to 3 years just due to the nature of the position. But if they offer more per season, he probably would do a shorter deal. So I do reservations at first, but then I had to remind myself, Williams is 25 years old. And I know he's got the major injury concerns, but he's 25 years old. So I think it's one of those things where a 2 to 3 year extension, right, isn't the end of the world. Running back rate isn't super high anyway, especially if you structure it in a team-friendly way, like give him a lot of money up front, spread it out like a signing bonus over 3 years, gives you some back-end flexibility if he has injuries or if he peters out. That seems most likely, and I think the Cowboys would probably plan to do that. Obviously, they'll wait how the season plays out, just because health with Williams was always the concern, right? If he can go through an entire season as the bell cow, the stud running back, and be healthy, definitely, he's worth it for sure. Anchors Away 9893 commented, I stand by the fact that this is a wild card team. Our defense is not quite good enough to beat playoff teams, but you never know when we get healthy and player development. The offense is potent. Bengals and Eagles have some great wide receivers, but I don't think they stack up with the Cowboys wide receiver squad. Obviously when healthy, when you look at Lamb and you look at, of course, Flanoy and Pickens and Tolbert and Turpin, it's a pretty, formidable wide receiver group, especially in Schottenheimer's scheme. So I agree with you 100%. It's a good pass-catching group. I came into the season, and this was before the Micah Parsons trade, but I said there are two parts of this team that are championship caliber, the pass catchers and the pass rush. With Micah Parsons gone, the pass rush fell away, of course, but the pass catchers remain as championship caliber. And I think that's going to be a part of this team, assuming they extend Pickens, which at this point, probably will continue to be a championship caliber part of this team for many years to come, because they've already extended Ferguson, they've already extended Turpin, right? Flanoy is still a young guy. So if you look at where this team is structured and where the strength of this team will be, as long as they extend Pickens, which they got more than enough cap space to do so, assuming he plays well and stays healthy, they'll be a championship caliber pass catching group for many years to come. Uncle Bubba Knows Everything, 9143, talking about the addition of Julian Wood back to the Cowboys practice squad, said Wood reminds me of a young Donovan Wilson before he got paid. Yeah, young Donovan Wilson, boy, that was kind of a pleasure to watch. I remember when he kind of came out of nowhere in 2020 due to some injuries, and he just was a turnover machine, a big play machine all over the place. I think he had takeaways against Minnesota in 2020, takeaways against San Francisco that I remember. He was a physical guy, reckless, abandoned, and he still plays that way, but just the takeaways have dipped. The big plays have dipped. It reminds me a little bit of Roy Williams, the Cowboys safety, who I was a huge fan of in the early 2000s, right? When he came into the NFL, it was just a playmaking machine, just takeaways, pick sixes, forced fumbles, obviously had the big hits, but as his career went on, the big plays kind of dipped considerably to the point where by 2007, 2008, he wasn't making enough of them. I think in 2006, he created a lot of big plays while giving up some. And as his career went on, fewer and fewer big plays, more and more big plays surrendered, and eventually it ended his career. I'm not saying Donovan Wilson was ever as good as Roy Williams. I don't think he was, not even close. But I think he had that same kind of career arc, that same path. And right now it's trending down. My opinion, hopefully he turns it around. But we'll see what happens, whether it's Wood, whether it's Clark, or whether it's a guy like Bell stepping up. They'll have an opportunity to see what they can do. All right, ZNZ8735 commented, all the people talking about signing Williams need to consider what our current O coordinator did with Arizona and the run game and what they are now without him. It's the system, not the player. He could be replaced by a lot of mid-tier running backs. Yeah, that is obviously something you keep in the back of your mind, so it has to be a team-friendly deal and all that structure. But I do think it's undeniable that Williams has played extremely well, right? It's not like he's averaging, only 4 yards a carry, and he hasn't had some highlight runs. I mean, he's had some great breaking tackle runs, some highlight stuff. The Jets run, long touchdown against the Giants. I mean, he's had some really good runs. I mean, he had that third and short run against the Jets on Sunday where we got tackled in the backfield, broke that tackle, and managed to fall forward for a first down. I mean, he's a physical guy, a physical presence. So it's more than just that. I think there is a little bit of player involved, But I do think you have the right approach to understand that. Listen, this was not a guy that people came into the season saying this was another, oh, great, this is another veteran running back that can't do anything that the Cowboys brought into the fold, right? People came into this thing saying the Cowboys running back room is terrible. And they weren't necessarily wrong based on what Williams had done, obviously due to some injury concerns in prior seasons. Now that Williams has stepped up, he's played great, but there is a point there. There is a scheme element. There is a coaching element. And that does make it hard sometimes. I will say that when it comes to making extension decisions. I think in prior seasons when it was less of a scheme, it's like, listen, you got to pay CeeDee Lamb because, I mean, he's just winning on talent alone. You got to pay Prescott winning on talent alone. And now you look at certain players doing well, and you're like, well, how much of it is scheme? How much of it is talent? It's a real argument and a real discussion and a real evaluation the Cowboys are going to have to make. That's why team-friendly deals for guys like Javonte Williams are going to be really, really important. All right, final comment here is from Delta 704, talking about the stat of the day from yesterday, highlighting that Houston right now has a higher splash play rate on a percentage basis than Micah Parsons. Delta 704 says Micah gets like 5x the snaps of Houston, which means 5x the splash plays. Give me a break. Well, obviously it was a percentage graphic, right? And no one is saying, and I said this yesterday, no one is saying Houston is better than Parsons, not even close. But it does speak to, sort of the value, perceived value of a guy like Parsons versus the reality that there's a delta there. And while Parsons certainly, the more plays you get, right? If Houston may only be on the field a certain amount of plays, he may be on the field if he's on the field only on 3rd and 10 in pass rush mode, it's not that he is, but just for argument's sake, if there's a defensive end that he has 10 plays a game and they're all 3rd and 10 plays, his chances of getting more splash plays, sacks, batted balls, whatever, go up a lot higher than a guy like Parsons who plays on a lot of runs up the middle, plays on a lot of 1st and 10 where the opportunities are a lot less. So that is a fair point to make in terms of the opportunities, right? It's like, cleanup hitter, has more opportunities, if you get a baseball analogy, to have runners in scoring position when he's up to bat than, say, the leadoff hitter. So there is a little dynamic there, and that's fair, right? That's why cleanup hitters tend to have, more RBI, for example. But I do think there's a point is that the overall production versus value and cost of Parsons versus what the Cowboys got for him is weighing a little bit more right now like it could be in the Cowboys' favor with the first-round picks, with Kenny Clark, and the emergence of a guy like Houston. If Fowler can continue to play better, Ezra Raku's getting better and better, right? Did a film review breakdown yesterday. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. So you look at this team and you just look at where they're structured. Again, they're not perfect. Obviously, the pass rush still has severe flaws. But the delta between the perceived value of Parsons and the real value is really narrowing right now. And I think that could be something that certainly plays in the Cowboys' favor. All right, that's all the comments for today. Obviously, we are working through preparation, getting ready for the Carolina Panthers, of course. Listen, love to get healthier. If Tyler Smith can play, that would be huge. Guiding back into the fold would be big as well. Obviously, Turpin seems out right now. Mingo and Kalen Carson, the corner, are getting reps at practice. So obviously, they're full go. We don't know if they'll be activated off injured reserve yet or not. That we'll have to see how that all shakes out. Looks like Donovan Wilson may not be able to play. Sanborn seems out, so we're going to get a lot more Shamar James. So healthier on offense for sure in some spots, more beat up on defense for sure in some spots. It's the way it works, life in the National Football League. We'll talk about it more tomorrow with the latest updates from today's practice. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.